The room went still the moment Captain Reynolds slammed his hand against the conference table. The impact rattled the coffee cup, sent a stack of flight plans sliding off the edge, and made even the most decorated pilots shift uncomfortably in their seats. His voice, sharp as steel and twice as cold, sliced through the heavy silence as he stared across the room. "You're just a checkbox, Carter. A diversity quota in a flight suit." The insult lingered, echoing off sterile walls and dying slow in the air while 30 pairs of eyes avoided hers. Emily Carter stood at the back of the room, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. Her uniform, a bit too loose, hung on her frame like it didn't quite belong there, like the people around her wanted to believe she didn't either. She said nothing. No one else spoke either. Not the lieutenants who had trained beside her, not the commanders who'd once shared meals in foreign airfields. Their silence said everything. She was alone, not just in space, but in allegiance. Reynolds let the quiet settle before smirking and returning to the mission brief, as if he hadn't just reduced her career to a cruel punchline. Pilots murmured to each other in low tones, some shaking their heads but none stepping forward. The air carried that electric tension of something wrong, left unchecked. Emily's eyes stayed forward. Her hands didn't twitch. Her chin didn't lower. Inside, something coiled tight, but she kept it hidden. She had learned long ago that outrage would only confirm their prejudice. Outside the room, jet engines roared across the tarmac like thunder held on a leash. Inside, a different storm brewed. Her name had been erased from the flight roster earlier that week, replaced with a snide scribble someone thought was funny. Diversity hire. Someone had even printed it out in bold. The shame wasn't in being left out. It was in knowing it wasn't an accident. And worse, that nobody thought it was worth correcting. She had become a symbol of something no one respected, and few even acknowledged. Reynolds walked past her on his way out, eyes narrowing just enough to make the moment sting. "Nice work out there, weather girl. Don't forget to tell us if it's going to rain." A few chuckles rippled through the group. One pilot whistled softly and looked away when she didn't react. She turned slowly, her boots silent against the floor, and walked to the exit without a word. Every step was a statement, not of weakness, but of defiance in silence. She wouldn't fight for attention in a room that had already made up its mind. Later, as the hallway cleared and fluorescent lights hummed overhead, she stood by the coffee machine she'd refilled earlier, still untouched. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was good enough to make the coffee, just not good enough to fly. She took one last look at the operations board where her name was still absent. It didn't surprise her anymore. It still hurt, though. Not because they doubted her skills, but because they never once bothered to ask what she really knew. Emily Carter walked back to her post, jaw tight, back straight, and heart steady. She wasn't there for approval. She was there for the sky. And when the sky called again, they'd remember what silence looks like when it chooses to speak. Part 1. Who is she really? At 35, Emily Carter lived in a world built from quiet repetition. Her 10-year-old Toyota Corolla groaned every morning as she turned the key, always starting on the second try. She parked at the far end of the lot at the base, not because she had to, but because it gave her time to finish her coffee in silence. Her apartment was a one-bedroom on the second floor of an old building just outside town. The carpets were thin, the heater clanged in winter, and the walls carried the faint smell of someone else's history. But it was hers, and it was enough. There were no pictures on the walls, no medals, no reminders of what she used to be. Just a dusty shelf of flight manuals that spanned 3 decades and a digital piano she hadn't touched since she left Afghanistan. Each morning, Emily walked into the control room long before anyone else arrived. She checked weather models, cross-referenced systems data, and filed maintenance flags that no one read. The technicians thought she was just thorough. The truth was, she saw things before they happened. She had a gift. Pattern recognition, some called it. Others called it luck. Emily called it the thing that kept people alive. Her uniform never fit quite right anymore. Supply only stocked standard sizes, and no one went out of their way to order for someone like her. Still, she wore it clean-pressed and with a quiet dignity that made even the sharpest insults feel dull by the time they reached her. She didn't speak much during the day, not because she had nothing to say, but because she had learned most people weren't really listening. Conversation stopped when she entered a room, not out of respect, but out of discomfort. The simulator in Hangar B hadn't been officially used in years. Too outdated, they said. But late at night, long after everyone else had gone, she powered it up. She ran scenarios no one had bothered to imagine. Engine flameouts at high-altitude simultaneous systems, collapse navigation in blind zones. She wasn't practicing. She was preparing. Emily ran simulations like a musician running scales. Muscle memory, repetition, precision. She logged each success and failure in a handwritten notebook worn at the edges, pages filled with symbols only she understood. Once a junior tech caught her working late and asked why she bothered. She'd just smiled and said everyone needs a reason to keep going. He didn't ask again. On the base, she was known for being strange. Not unkind, just distant. Rumors clung to her like smoke. That she froze up in combat. That she broke under pressure. That she was just here to fill a diversity quota. No one knew about the Distinguished Flying Cross nomination, or the time she landed a jet with half a wing missing, or how she used trigonometry and instinct to pull herself and her wingman out of a death spiral at 30,000 feet. Emily didn't need them to know. Not anymore. She kept her desk tidy, filed every report, answered every call. She showed up, stayed late, and left without complaint. It wasn't about recognition. It was about discipline, purpose, something no one could take away from her no matter what they said. She carried herself like someone used to being underestimated. Someone who had learned to turn invisibility into a kind of power. She didn't ask for trust. She waited to earn it, even if it never came. Every night as the rest of the base wound down, Emily returned to the simulator. She adjusted its aging software line by line, customizing it to reflect realities the manuals ignored. She created protocols for scenarios deemed unsolvable. In that quiet, dimly lit room, she wasn't forgotten. She was free. Free to test limits, to fail and try again, to chase perfection not for applause but because she believed it mattered. At home, she'd cook just enough for one, often reheating leftovers from days before. She'd sit by the window while the base lights glimmered in the distance, wondering how many more years she could do this without breaking. She had stopped waiting for them to remember who she was. Instead, she focused on remembering it herself. Emily Carter had once been a name that pilots spoke with awe. Now it was barely whispered, but her mind remained sharp, her hands steady, her heart quietly fierce. She had not forgotten how to fly. She had only forgotten what it felt like to be seen. And someday, when the world tilted wrong again, she would be ready to set it right. Not for glory, not for redemption, just because that's who she was. Part 2. The Fall from Grace. Sub. Part 2.1. Afghanistan. The mission that broke her. The mountains around Kandahar rose like jagged teeth, casting long shadows over the narrow road that wound through the valley. Emily Carter's FA-18 flew high above sensors, humming targeting systems locked on the three-vehicle convoy moving below. Command had flagged the middle truck as hostile, a high-value target linked to multiple attacks. The order was clear: confirm and engage, but something felt wrong. Emily zoomed in through the targeting pod, studying every frame. The vehicle didn't match military specs. The windows weren't armored. Through the dusty glass, she saw small faces, some smiling, one pressing a hand against the pane as if waving to the clouds. She keyed the radio, her voice steady but low, requested visual confirmation. Silence followed, then command snapped back tight and dismissive. Intelligence is solid. Execute. Her gut twisted. The faces in the truck weren't fighters, they were children, playing, laughing, clueless that death hovered just above them. Emily hovered on the edge of a decision she could never undo. If she obeyed, she'd go home a hero. Another commendation, another stripe. But those kids would die. If she disobeyed, she'd be finished. Stripped of everything she had worked for since 17. She took a breath, called it, abort mission, return to base. The fallout was immediate. Within hours, she stood before a tribunal. No uniform, no rank insignia, just the weight of her decision wrapped tight around her shoulders. They demanded to know why she had disobeyed, where she got her intel, who gave her the tip. She refused to answer. Protecting the source meant protecting others, including a former militant who had risked his life to pass a warning that day. His child had been on that bus. The room grew colder with each question she didn't answer. Her silence filled the gaps they tried to break open. When they couldn't get what they wanted, they rewrote the story, said she cracked, lost her nerve, made up excuses to justify her failure. They stripped her of her position, demoted her, reassigned her to base support stateside, quietly, without ceremony. A whisper campaign followed her home saying she wasn't fit to fly, that she had hesitated in combat. The truth never made it into the reports. It stayed buried with the source, with the 12 kids who survived because of her choice. There was no medal, no thank you, just a cold flight back to the States and a new badge with her name printed too small. Marcus, her wingman that day, found her just before she left. He asked why she didn't speak up, why she didn't clear her name. She told him what mattered more. If she had told the truth more, children might die. Exposing a fragile intel link could have unraveled years of careful groundwork. Better one career than one school bus. He pressed a coin into her hand. Not military issue. Engraved with 12 stars and 2 words, Guardian Angel. She carried it in her pocket for 5 years. Every day since that mission, Emily lived in the space between disgrace and clarity. She had chosen conscience over career, integrity over obedience. And while the world forgot her, she remembered every face in that convoy, especially the one that smiled at the sky. Subpart 2.2: The Years of Isolation. The transfer back to stateside wasn't a clean slate. It was exile. Emily arrived at the base with no announcement, no welcome, and a quiet understanding that she wasn't wanted. She was assigned to support duties that didn't match her rank or her record, filing weather updates, cleaning briefing rooms, running system diagnostics that no one checked. Tasks given to rookies, not veterans. Her name was removed from flight rosters. Her locker was moved to the far end of the hangar. On her 3rd week, someone scratched coward into the paint of her storage drawer. She didn't report it. She didn't react. She just brought in sandpaper from home and scrubbed it off during her lunch break. No one sat with her in the mess hall. She ate alone her tray, always neat, her eyes never lifting from the technical manual she brought with her. They called her Weather Girl Ghost Pilot Diversity Project. Each nickname chipped away at something, but not enough to break it. They wanted her to quit. That was the goal. A slow unraveling. Isolate her until the silence felt louder than any order to leave. Some days her flight suit disappeared. Other days she found reports she submitted tossed in the trash before anyone read them. Once during an inventory check, a junior officer laughed and asked if she knew which end of a wrench to hold. She didn't argue. She nodded and kept moving quietly, correcting mistakes others overlooked, logging inconsistencies no one cared about. What they missed, she saw. What they mocked, she mastered. At night, when the base emptied out, she returned to the old simulator. It wasn't part of her duties. It wasn't even powered most of the time. But she had figured out how to restart its systems manually, line by line, each keystroke a familiar rhythm. She ran emergencies others said couldn't be trained for. Engine failure in a blizzard, full system blackout during carrier approach, mid-air collision recovery. She failed a lot at first. Then she got better. No one noticed. No one asked. And that was the point. The longer she stayed quiet, the easier it was for them to forget what she once was. That suited her. Being invisible gave her room to work, room to grow. Emily never lashed out, never wrote complaints. She carried her silence like armor, each quiet task a small rebellion. While they sneered, she studied. While they mocked, she prepared. And every time she touched the controls of that simulator, she remembered why she stayed. Not for them, but for the sky, and for the moment when someone somewhere might need her again. Part 3. The Turning Point. The warning no one heard. The hangar was quiet at 10:47 p.m., just the way Emily liked it. The lights buzzed softly overhead, casting a yellow tint over the weather monitoring equipment she'd learned better than her own reflection. Operation Skyfire was less than 12 hours away, and everyone else had already gone home, their confidence unchecked, their plans locked in. Emily stayed like always. Not because she was needed, but because habits held tighter than orders. She flipped through forecast layers, pressure maps, temperature gradients, looking for the details others dismissed. That's when she saw it. A sliver of abnormality. A low-level wind shear forming in the lower jet stream, subtle but sharp-timed, just wrong against the flight path. It wasn't obvious. Most people would miss it. But she didn't. She leaned in, ran the numbers twice, then a third time to be sure. The data whispered something no one else could hear. The kind of convergence that doesn't show up in models until it's too late. She hesitated for a second, then opened a new report file. She laid it out clean with supporting data notes and flight risk estimates. She marked it urgent unsigned and sent it to the tower database where she knew it would sit unread by morning. The base was silent again. Nothing changed. Emily leaned back in her chair, rubbed the corners of her eyes, and reached for her coat. Her bag was already packed. On the seat beside it sat her transfer request to a desk job in San Diego. She had filled it out 2 weeks ago unsigned, but tonight something in her wanted to finish it. As she reached for a pen, her phone buzzed. Unknown number, likely junk. She almost ignored it. Almost. She opened the message out of habit and then froze. The screen lit up with a photo. 12 children standing in front of a dusty school in Kandahar, smiling, older now but unmistakable. They held a banner hand-painted in uneven English. "Thank you, guardian angel." Her chest clenched. For a long time she couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The phone slipped from her fingers and landed on the floor, the screen still glowing. She reached for it with shaking hands, staring at their faces through a blur of sudden silent tears. She hadn't cried in years, not when they demoted her, not when they scrubbed her record, but this broke something open. Each child was alive because she said no, because she chose what was right, not what was safe. And in that moment, surrounded by silence, she remembered why she had stayed. Not out of guilt, not because she didn't know how to leave, but because deep down, some part of her had never given up. Some part of her knew this day would come. She pulled open her desk drawer and took out the coin Marcus had given her. 12 stars, one for each child. She ran her thumb across its edge and felt something shift inside her, a memory softening into purpose. A folded piece of paper slipped out behind it, a handwritten note barely legible now. They lived because you stood alone. Stand again when the time comes. Emily sat in silence, the kind that didn't feel empty, just full of everything unspoken. Her breath slowed. Her spine straightened. She looked over at the transfer request. Then she tore it in half. Then in quarters. Then again. Outside, the wind picked up. The first signs of the system she'd warned about. She turned back to her screen and pulled up the forecast interface. For the next hour, she fine-tuned her anomaly models, cross-referenced patterns, watched the data bend into a shape no one else would recognize. They'll call it a freak accident tomorrow, she thought. A perfect storm. But it wasn't perfect. It was predictable. If you knew where to look. She clicked through every possible scenario, ran simulations on the old backup computer she'd quietly enhanced over the past year. Every keystroke came fast, natural, precise. At 2:11 a.m. she logged the final projection. She saved a copy to her flash drive and hid it in her locker. The backup simulator in Hangar B was warmed up and humming softly in the dark. Emily stood and looked at her reflection in the office window. Her face was pale eyes rimmed with fatigue. But she saw it now. That flicker. That piece of herself she thought was gone. She wasn't just ready. She was waiting. Tomorrow, if no one listened again, she'd be there. And this time she would not walk away. Part 4. Disaster strikes. She takes over. Subpart 4.1. The collapse begins. The morning sky over the airfield was clean, almost too perfect. Sunlight poured across the tarmac as 12 FA-18s lined up engines, growling cockpits, closed wings gleaming. Pilots walked with their usual swagger helmets tucked under one arm, unaware that the air around them had turned unpredictable. In the tower, energy buzzed with pride and precision. Controllers moved with clipped confidence, voices, sharp routines locked. It was a show after all, a performance for brass and allies watching from a dozen feeds. Emily Carter stood off to the side at the auxiliary console headset, on her eyes locked on a weather screen no one else bothered to check. The anomaly was growing. The wind shear was no longer theory. It was forming into something bigger. She keyed her mic, spoke quickly, clearly. Shift in low-altitude patterns, recommend adjusting altitude brackets. Her words cut through the radio just before the lead jet took off. Captain Reynolds' voice came back flat and annoyed. Maintain radio discipline. We're flying. Don't interrupt unless there's lightning. Emily clenched her teeth and said nothing more. The board in front of her was changing color now. Temperatures dipped, then spiked. Pressure lines twisted. She watched the sky become something it wasn't meant to be. At 7:12 a.m., the first pilot called in. Instruments glitching, minor systems down. Nothing serious, just a blip. Then another. Altimeter failure. Navigation misread. Backup compass spinning. By 7:18, panic had settled into the tower like fog. 5 aircraft reported simultaneous electronics malfunctions. No pattern the controllers could see. Just chaos layered over confusion. Emily spoke again. Recommended immediate return to base. Protocol warning issued. She tried to explain data already scrolling behind her. Supervisor Green turned to her, jaw tight. Not now. You've done enough. She stepped back. Her hands shook, but not from fear. From rage. They weren't seeing it, and she couldn't make them. Outside, the jets flew on, straight into the convergence. Voices on the radio overlapped. One plane had lost complete hydraulic control. Another was blind. No readouts, no feedback. A pilot cursed mid-sentence before cutting out completely. Emily watched the screen and knew what was coming. The pressure dip was about to trigger turbulence strong enough to split formation, the kind that tore wings off metal and scattered wreckage across empty fields. She turned to the backup monitor, fingers hovering above the keys. Her calculations had predicted this exact sequence. Her report buried in the system had warned them all. The tower around her shifted into something brittle, shouting, rushed commands. A voice crackled in over emergency frequency, low and broken. Mayday. Electrical fire. No ejection possible. Emily moved toward the console, the one tied to the forgotten simulator. Her body led before her mind could weigh the cost. Then Reynolds stormed in, eyes wild, voice sharp. Back away! You don't get to play hero today. She stopped, only for a moment. Her gaze held steady. If she didn't act now, they would all die, and they would never know who tried to save them. Subpart 4.2, Angel Returns. Emily didn't wait for permission. She crossed the tower floor in 3 steps and dropped into the auxiliary seat linked to the simulator. Her hands moved fast, activating a system most of them thought was obsolete. Her voice steady even as the room around her spun into panic. She opened the emergency frequency, not the main one, the one no one had used in years. Then she spoke calm and clipped to 12 pilots falling through the sky. Switch to channel 132.5. Execute protocol 77 Alpha. Do it now. For a moment, nothing. Then a familiar voice cracked through the static. Mitchell, his usual arrogance stripped down to raw fear. Is that you? That's not possible. Emily responded without hesitation. Less talk. More flying. Follow my lead or eject. Your choice. Something shifted in the air. One by one, the icons on the screen blinked as pilots switched channels. She gave each one a command. Bank here. Kill throttle there. Roll 2 degrees. Look for the stable pocket in the wind and ride it like a wave. No one argued, not anymore. The tower fell silent except for her voice threading through the storm like steel wire. She guided them through turbulence too sharp to calculate, through systems too fried to trust, through air that no longer obeyed the laws they had trained for. One by one, the jets leveled out. One by one, they responded. Backup controls engaged, power rerouted, altitude regained. Emily flew with them, not from the sky but from a chair she had worn into shape over 5 years of exile. She knew every vibration of the simulator, every delay in its feedback. It was an extension of her will. She was everywhere at once. 12 minds, 12 machines, 12 lives. Someone in the tower whispered, "She's flying all of them. How is that even possible?" Captain Mitchell's jet was last. Dual engine failure, no controls, no hope. He called out, voice flat with dread, "I'm losing altitude. I don't have a shot at this." Emily keyed in her response. "Kill all electronics. Glide it. You trained for this. I'll get you home." She painted the wind for him, described the way it moved, how to read it through instinct instead of instruments, told him when to tilt, when to coast, when to trust the weight of the air under his wings. Mitchell followed her word for word. His jet dropped, caught, dipped again, then almost impossibly it steadied. The landing was rough but real. Wheels hit tarmac with a screech that shook the glass. In the tower, no one moved. Emily removed her headset, stood slowly, heart still racing. Around her silence, not disbelief, reverence. She looked out the window at 12 jets lined in a staggered path across the runway, all of them intact, all of them home. Then she turned, grabbed her bag and walked out, like she had just finished an ordinary shift, like saving them had been the plan all along. Part 5. The Silent Triumph. The day after the disaster, that wasn't the base returned to order. Jets were inspected, systems reviewed, and everyone quietly acknowledged that something extraordinary had happened. But no press release was issued, no medals pinned. Emily packed up her locker with slow, careful movements. A flight manual, a notebook full of simulations, and the coin with 12 stars. The uniform folded clean, left behind. As she stepped into the hallway, the pilots stood waiting. No one spoke. They just raised their hands in a silent salute. She met their eyes, each one without lingering. Not with pride or triumph, just with the steady gaze of someone who had nothing left to prove. Captain Mitchell waited by her car, not in command anymore, but as a man who had been changed. He handed her a sealed envelope. "The Pentagon wants to reinstate you. Full rank. Public recognition." Emily placed it on the passenger seat without opening it. Her keys were already in the ignition, her path already chosen. He asked her why. Why walk away now after everything? She answered without hesitation. "Because this isn't where I'm needed anymore." In the trunk was a duffel packed for Montana, a small flight school outside Missoula tucked between pine forests and wide sky. They worked with kids who had nowhere else to go, teens who needed something to believe in. She'd found them by accident, an old flyer on a community board. They didn't ask about her past, just whether she could teach someone to fly. When she arrived, the school was quiet. One hangar, 2 trainers, a dog that barked at shadows. She stepped into the office and introduced herself. They didn't recognize her name. That was the point. Her first student was 17, angry and convinced he'd never be good at anything. Emily taught him how to sit still, how to read the wind, how to listen before taking action. By the end of the month, he was flying solo. By the end of the year, he was mentoring the next kid who thought he didn't belong. Emily's days became full of early mornings and steady progress. No screaming engines, no tower chatter, just wind, sky, and purpose. She didn't miss the base, or the silence that used to follow her through the halls. What she missed, she carried inside her. Some nights she sat on the porch and looked up at the stars, tracing the flight paths she used to know. She never spoke about the 12 planes she brought home. But sometimes when the wind hit just right, she smiled. People asked why she gave up a decorated career. She never corrected them. The truth didn't need to be explained. It just needed to be lived. In Montana, she wasn't a hero. She was a teacher, a mentor, a steady presence in the lives of kids who didn't yet believe they could rise. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, not for what she had done, but for what she gave every day. It wasn't the life others imagined for her, but it was the life she had built one choice at a time. Quiet, solid, worth everything. And that was enough. Emily drove slowly as the base faded behind her. The sun sat low on the horizon, casting long streaks of gold across the road. In the rearview mirror, the airstrip was just a silhouette, now quiet and still. The coin sat in the center console beside her, face up, the 12 stars catching the light. She reached over, ran her finger across the edge, and let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. It was the kind of breath you take when something heavy finally lifts. Admiral Thomas had met her at the gate that morning, unannounced. Just 2 women standing in the early fog, no ranks between them. He asked her one question before she left. "If it were you, after everything, could you forgive?" She didn't answer right away. She had held on to silence for so long it almost felt like a shield. But she looked at him, really looked, and realized the question wasn't about anyone else. It was about her. Forgiveness isn't for them. It's what lets you breathe again. It's what lets you move forward without dragging the past behind you like a shadow. She thought about that now as the miles passed and the landscape opened wide. Forgiveness had not come easy. It hadn't arrived with a ceremony or an apology. It had come in moments, in choice after choice to keep showing up. Strength, she realized, was never about being loud or proving people wrong. It was about standing when no one clapped, holding your line when it would be easier to step back. It was about doing what's right when no one will see it, and still doing it anyway. She didn't need her wings to be returned. She had never really lost them. They had simply changed shape. Her flight was no longer in jets or call signs or ranks. It was in the quiet victories, the students she would teach, the lives she might help shape. As the mountains of Montana came into view, she felt something settle in her chest. Not closure, something better. continuation. Some people go through life collecting medals. Others collect moments. She had plenty of the second. She turned onto the gravel drive of the school just as the sun dipped behind the ridge. Kids were out front tossing a football in a crooked arc. One boy waved. She waved back. They didn't know who she had been. And that, in a way, was the greatest honor of all, because it meant she would be seen for who she chose to be now. She shut off the engine and sat for a second longer, then picked up the coin, slipped it in her pocket, and stepped out into the cool evening air. Some heroes carry their stories loud, others carry them like a quiet flame. She carried hers with dignity. That was enough. If this story stirred something in you, take a moment. Ask yourself what kind of strength you believe in, and who you might choose to forgive.